The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics. And for the past 6 years, I've been working closely with Bob, originating our NFL and college basketball picks. And I am joined today, as always, by our digital media specialist, Grant. You're back from Minnesota.
Yes, sir. Back from Minnesota. I figured it'd be a good time to go up north since we're about to preview this NFC North division.
All right, well, let's send it straight to the NFC North preview.
The Lions' win total is set at 9.5, and they're coming off a 9-8 season where they placed sixth in weighted DVOA. The team was kind of slow out of the gate as they started 1-6, and their defense was just getting picked apart. But the team was starting to pass the eye test, and Jared Goff was running that Ben Johnson offense effectively, and the Lions went 8-2 in their last 10 games to finish 9-8, and they just barely missed the playoffs. So everyone seems to remember how strong the Lions looked towards the last half of last season, but what can we expect from them in 2023?
Yeah, well, you mentioned they were looking strong. I mean, the market implied power ratings had this offense fifth to close last season, and I think it'd be very difficult for the offense to be any better going into 2023 because there's pretty clearly a top four with, in no particular order, the Chiefs, Eagles, Bengals, and Bills. So fifth, where they were in market to close last season, I think certainly is the ceiling for Goff in his second year in this system with excellent coordinator Ben Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, so last year we kind of saw Jared Goff. He was playing very well. Is this his new standard?
Well, I think it goes. Most of the credit's going to have to go to Ben Johnson. I mean, Goff rated as our 26th best quarterback by our metrics, but Johnson was a half point better than average a play caller. And what he really did was he zagged against the league, going to those too high shells and putting lighter players or less players in the box. And Johnson said, well, if you're going to do that, I'm just going to run bully ball right at you. And that was very effective for the Lions last year. Now going into year two of this system, though, with Goff, I think teams will know more of what to expect. And like I said, I think I don't expect them to be the fifth best offense like we saw them rated in market at the end of last season.
Yeah, well, they are playing bully ball with two very good running backs with Williams and Swift, and both those guys are gone now, and that's 22 touchdowns gone from there. But I kind of have a feeling that you and your model don't think too much about replacing running backs like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly not going to make any improvements to this offense based off of running backs. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 running backs in the NFL that actually make a difference to the point spread. It's certainly not David Montgomery or a rookie Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Gibbs play, though. I think he'll be fun to watch this year.
Yeah, I mean, Johnson's very creative play caller, so I'm sure he's going to get Gibbs involved in all sorts of ways out there.
You talked about the defense a little bit, so let's look at this defense. And they were horrible last year, and they did make some additions, and the market thinks this is going to help. What do you see here?
Yeah, well, there's only one way to go, and that's up, because they were the last rated defense in market last year. So they get rid of Jeff Okudah and Amani Oruwariye, who were horrendous cornerbacks, and they bring in Cameron Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley and CJ Gardner-Johnson in the secondary. Now, those guys will be an improvement on Okudah and Oruwariye, but those guys are not, difference-making secondary players. So, you can still be below average and improve to where they were last year. You can improve maybe quite a bit from the production that they got from Okudah and Oruwariye. It might be as much as a 2-point improvement right there, but I wouldn't get too excited about Sutton, Mosley, or Gardner-Johnson making a Pro Bowl team on this defense.
Yeah, well, we also saw them. They have Houston coming back this year. He's going to be healthy, and then also you have Aiden Hutchinson that's going to have a year under his belt. So I think we're going to see some improvement here. Yeah,
well, I like the Lions pass rush to make a bit of a jump this year. Like you mentioned, James Houston wasn't healthy all last season, but he was the team's best pass rusher when he was on the field. In fact, Houston had the highest pass rushing efficiency of any edge defender in the NFL with over 75 pass rushing snaps in 2022. And it's worth noting that a top edge rusher would be getting about 5 times the amount of pass rushing snaps, so his efficiency will drop once he he is on the field more often. But there's a case to be made that Houston could be an underrated a player going into this year. And you mentioned that Aiden Hutchinson, as a rookie, had 53 pressures, which is pretty solid for a rookie. And we talked about this in podcasts previously. The biggest jump that a players make in their careers is from year 1 to year 2. So Hutchinson has the potential. He's on that kind of trajectory to be one of those Pro Bowl caliber edge rushers. So we'll see what he can do opposite Houston in this defense.
Yeah, I mean, their NFC battles they're gonna be interesting. Like you're gonna have to kind of see, like, are they gonna be a team that battles with the Cowboys, the 49ers? What do you think overall?
Yeah, I mean, those certainly are the teams that we can talk about. The Lions being in the same offensive tier with, and so we talked about how the market had them rated fifth at the end of last season, but we don't think that they're going to be fifth going into next season. So really, where you're going to come out on this Lions team with an improved defense, where you're going to come out on them overall is if you think that they're 2 points better than market, 1.5 points better than average, like the market is saying. You're basically saying that this offense has to be better than the Cowboys and 49ers. And the defense, I don't think this defense can be above average just with the talent they have. Now, they can certainly play up to average. So it's going to come down to where do you rate out this offense?
Let's move on to the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings win total set at 8.5, and they're coming off their 13-4 season where they placed 28th in weighted DVOA. The team did not really have very high expectations coming into last season as they were adjusting to a new offense, but they came out flying. They went off to that 8-1 start, and the offense was fantastic. So Kirk Cousins played above expectation last year, but can we expect this to kind of be his new bar?
Well, I mean, above expectations is right. We talked about how the Lions ended the season. The Lions offense ended the season fifth in market, and the Vikings finished sixth in market offensively. So that's certainly higher than what we would expect in offense led by Kirk Cousins. But the big change from last year was that Cousins went from 18th in EPA per play and 33rd in average depth of target before the TJ Hawkinson trade to 11th in EPA per play and 12th in average depth of target after. So the Hawkinson trade basically allowed Justin Jefferson to exploit the more deep areas of the field while still giving Cousins a reliable target underneath. And I think that really transformed the Vikings offense in 2022.
Yeah, it was impressive seeing those numbers go up when he got Hawk. So they drafted Jordan Addison. Is he going to be a kind of just the replacement for Adam Thielen, you think?
Yeah, well, Thielen was bad last year. So as a rookie, you can't expect too much from rookies in terms of above replacement level production. But I don't think that Addison is going to be worse than Thielen was last year. And, you have the best wide receiver in the NFL by our metrics, one of the better tight ends. And I think it's safe to say that this receiving core is going to be, close to the top of the NFL, certainly top 10, maybe even with teams like the Seahawks and Chargers receiving core.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk's going to have a top receiving core. Is that going to be enough to bring that kind of slightly above average quarterback to Super Bowl contention?
Well, Kirk's a Kirk, and I don't know that he's ever going to win a Super Bowl. He's that kind of guy. He's consistent. He's going to consistently be the 12th best quarterback in the NFL. There's a lot of things to like about Kirk. I mean, he hasn't missed a game due to injury since he became the full-time starter in Washington in 2015. That's pretty remarkable. And we saw how much time Kirk devotes to his body on the Netflix quarterback show. So, I think that we can just expect Kirk to be the 12th best quarterback in the NFL this year. And, everything else would have to click on this Vikings team for them to make a Super Bowl run. But at least he's not a high variance quarterback. We know what to expect from a healthy Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I mean, consistency is one of the biggest things you can ask for. But So let's look at their offensive line. It was a major issue for them last year. How did they rank, and what can we expect from them to see? We're going to see some improvement in 2023.
So the Vikings finished 26th in pass blocking efficiency last season, so near the bottom of the league. However, both left tackle Christian Darrisaw and right tackle Brian O'Neill ranked top 15 in pass blocking grade on true pass blocking snaps, according to PFF. So the interior let them down. 71% of the pressure on Kirk Cousins last season came from up the middle. For reference, that was 7 percentage points higher than any other team in the NFL. Houston was second worst, but they weren't even close to the amount of interior pressure percentage as the Vikings. And the league average would be to expect that slightly less than half of your pressure would come up the interior, nowhere near the 71% that the Vikings had last year. So needless to say, there's room for growth there. First off, though, interior blocking isn't as sticky year to year as tackle play. So they can improve. All three of their starters on the interior were drafted in the first 2 rounds. So they have some pedigree there. And now they have another year in Kevin O'Connell's system to work on the communication for blitz pickups, et cetera. So I do expect the Vikings offensive line to jump to above average this season based off of the tackle quality, and it really can't be worse from the interior perspective.
So I think it's going to probably come down to Vikings and the Lions battling for that division. Is there anything you see there when you're looking eye to eye with those two teams?
Yeah, I mean, let's just go through it and compare them. So I think we can say that Cousins is a better quarterback than Jared Goff. I think we could say that the Lions have a better offensive line, but the Vikings probably have a better receiving core. The Lions have a better play caller. So, we're looking there along the offensives. I mean, there's not much to separate these two offenses. I wouldn't be surprised if either finished above or below, and they're both probably in that borderline top 10 range. So it's going to come down to the defenses between these two teams. And we talked about how the Lions have improved their defense from where they were at 32nd in market last year. And so we might as well take a look at the Vikings defense next.
Yeah, I mean, when you do look at the Vikings defense, they lost a lot of pieces. So what are your thoughts on the guys that they let walk?
Yeah, I mean, they lose their best pass rusher on the edge, Sedarius Smith, their best pass rusher on the interior, Dalvin Tomlinson, both starting cornerbacks, and their top linebacker, Eric Kendricks. So a lot walked out the door from a defense that already wasn't that good last season.
The team brought in a new defensive coordinator. How are you feeling about Brian Flores?
Well, Flores, before his little stint last year with the Steelers as an assistant, was the head coach in Miami. In his first season in Miami, they arguably had the worst defensive talent in the NFL. I think if people remember, that was when people were talking about Miami tanking for Tua in the offseason and in summer training camp. So defense was terrible, and they finished dead last in points per game allowed. In his second season, they jumped from dead last to 4th in points allowed. And his last season as the head coach in Miami, they finished around average. And basically what Flores is going to do is run a heavy blitzing man defense that without any guys is potentially going to give up a ton of big plays if you don't have those guys in the secondary that can make it happen from a coverage standpoint. So it could be ugly for this defense this year without a lot of talent, with all that talent walking out the door. But in general, if you have a defense with average talent, Flores can get that defense into the top 5 of the NFL, which we saw in his second year in Miami.
Yeah, well, they did bring in some new players. So we see Byron Murphy. He's in town. Is he going to be a good fit for the Flores scheme?
Well, Byron Murphy comes over from Arizona. He's a solid cornerback, but he's slow. So he's more of a zone cornerback. And we saw him kind of excel in that Vance Joseph fire zone scheme that they ran with the Cardinals. But you don't want a slow cornerback when you're running a ton of man coverage, because basically then just the best receivers and the NFL are just going to run, go routes and crosses against you, and you're not going to be able to keep up. So kind of a weird signing by the Vikings. I don't think he necessarily matches their vision in terms of what this defense is going to be. But yeah, I think Byron Murphy is a better zone than man cornerback.
What's your take on the new addition of Marcus Davenport?
Well, I like that signing a lot better. He's been one of those guys that's always been unlucky, converting pressures to sacks. He's always getting into, collapsing the pocket, getting right there, getting a hand on the quarterback, but not quite getting the sack. And those are the kind of guys that typically the sacks do eventually come. Pressures is certainly more sticky than sacks production.
What can we kind of expect from this team that just won 13 games, but now the market has them at 8.5 wins? So are people sleeping on the Vikings, or is this justified?
Well, the Vikings won 11 one-score games last year, and we typically see those teams that do so outrageously well in one-score games regress, and that's what the market's reflecting. They're basically saying that the Vikings were an average team last year. They won a lot of coin flips, and we're going to set them as an average team going into this season. But I think that the Vikings certainly offensively are a dangerous team. So it's really going to come down to, it's the boom or bust type of deal. It's going to come down to how many turnovers can Brian Flores' defense create, because they're certainly going to give up a lot of big plays.
All right. Well, I think it's time to move on, and let's dive into the Packers. So the Packers win total is set at 7.5, and they're coming off an 8-9 season where they finished 9th in weighted DVOA. The season was quite the roller coaster ride, as they started at 3-1, they dropped 5 straight games, and they would go to 4-8, and then they won 4 straight to be 8-8 going into Week 18, where they played the Lions, and the Lions eliminated them from playoff contention. So I think we just need to address the elephant in the room. Aaron Rodgers is gone, and the team is turning to Jordan Love. What can we expect or predict from Love this year?
Well, it's going to be a wide range of outcomes for Love. He only has 86 passing plays in the NFL, and he's got he averaged 6.8 yards per pass play, which is pretty solid. But the 3.6% interception rate was not good. So I think it's fair to say that this offense could be, in that league average range. That might be their ceiling, unless Love is, really good. But I would say, in the 95th percentile outcome, this offense's ceiling is league average, and they also could be one of the worst offenses in the NFL if Love is not good.
Yeah, well, they also lost Lazard and Cobb. So are they going to be able to put like a comparable receiving room together for Love to throw to?
Well, this receiving core is rough. Unless they can get solid production from one of their second-round picks, Jaden Reed or Luke Musgrave, or Christian Watson makes the leap and becomes a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. So neither of those seem likely to me. I mean, you're relying on a second-round pick to produce right away, or you're expecting Christian Watson to be one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. But it is possible. I mean, Watson averaged 3.32 yards per route run against man coverage as a rookie, which ranked 5th in the NFL between A.J. Brown and Justin Jefferson. And we know that receiving production against man is more sticky year to year than receiving production against zone. So we could see Watson become a top 10 wide receiver, but I think it's safer to say that he's going to be in that 20 to 30 range. And a lot, teams will be able to devote a lot of coverage towards Watson because they just don't have a threat anywhere else in the receiving core.
Yeah. But on Watson's part, those are 2 really good names to kind of be right next to. So at least the bright side, he could pick it up for this year. But let's look to the offensive line here. So the line had solid production last year, but they're going to return David Bakhtiari. So how good could this line be with him back?
Well, yeah, David Bakhtiari really hasn't been healthy these last 2 seasons, and they return every other starter from an offensive line that ranked 5th in pass block win rate last year. So I think it's we can make the case that all three of the teams we talked about today, the Lions, the Vikings, and now the Packers, might have top 10 offensive lines. So the NFC North is going to be a true battle in the trenches.
All right. Well, let's dive over to the defense here. So when we're looking at their defense, the main piece that they lost is safety Adrian Amos. Is this going to be a pretty big impact?
Well, I did like Amos in general, and he's, I think he could be all right for the Jets this year. But we're really just looking at what did Amos give the Packers last year, and that was not up to his usual standard. Amos ranked 65th in PFF grade out of 69 qualifying safeties, and Darnell Savage, the other starting safety for the Packers, ranked dead last. So it's hard to imagine that the Packers could get worse play from their safeties this year, even losing Adrian Amos.
Yeah, they also have Rashawn Gary coming back this year. What are your thoughts on him?
Well, Gary's one of the better pass rushers in the NFL, and he actually ranked fifth in pass rushing efficiency among edge defenders in the first half of last season before he got hurt. So I think it's reasonable to think that getting Gary back will be a major improvement for this Packers pass rush that was missing him down the stretch in 2022.
Yeah, I remember going into last season, there was so much hype on the Packers defense that they just built up that was supposed to be elite. So is there a chance that we see this just happen a year too late?
Well, there's a lot of first round draft picks on that defense. So certainly if everything clicks, Joe Barry's defense could be top 10, but he just hasn't gotten them to that point yet. So it's a matter of, it's going to really come down to those names in the secondary outside of Jair Alexander. I can't quite get there myself. Just relying on Darnell Savage, Eric Stokes, Rasul Douglas, Keyshawn Nixon. I mean, those guys aren't jumping off the page now. Obviously, Jair Alexander is in that conversation for the All-Pro team every year, but it's going to come down to whether those guys can make a difference, whether Devontae Wyatt in his second year can add a run-stopping force in the interior. We're certainly not going to start the Packers defense in the top 10, but I don't think I would be surprised just based off of the draft pedigree of all those guys.
All right, let's move on to the Chicago Bears. So the Bears win total is set at 7.5, and they're coming off a terrible 3-14 season where they ranked 31st in weighted DVOA. The Bears started off last season great. They were 2-1, and that was pretty much the top of the mountain for them. So we saw them trade Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn and just kind of accept that their defense was going to be awful in 2022. But the offense did begin to look better under new coordinator Luke Getsy, and he was able to help Justin Fields improve and kind of see some progression there. But I don't know. It's kind of make or break time for Justin Fields. What can we expect from them going into 2023?
Well, I could see Fields in a finish the season as a Pro Bowl level player, or I could see Fields this being Fields' last season as a starter in the NFL. So there's another wide range of outcomes, like we talked about with Jordan Love in the previous segment. Another wide range of outcomes for a quarterback in the NFC North here with Justin Fields. So let's start with the positive. Fields has more rushing EPA in his first two seasons in the league than any quarterback in our database, and that includes Lamar Jackson and Cam Newton. However, he's finished last or close to last in yards per pass play in both seasons, starting with a career 3.6 interception rate, which is terrible. So we know quarterback rushing has less variance season to season than passing. So you'd rather your quarterback be one of the better rushing quarterbacks of the last couple of decades to start his career, and hope that he can improve on the passing. And we could see that passing improvement come from an actual real receiving core.
Yeah, and you talk about an actual real receiving core. They brought in DJ Moore, who I think is a pretty big upgrade from anything they've seen recently.
Yes, it'd certainly be the best receiver that Fields has had throughout his career. We actually saw DJ Moore rank 8th in yards per route run in that 2020 season with Teddy Bridgewater throwing him the football. So Moore has really popped as a receiver. He might not be a top 10 receiver, but I think he is in that top 15 range. So he'll give Fields a true number one weapon on the outside this season.
Yeah. Well, we've also seen Justin Fields. He's been running for his life the last couple of years. So do you think this addition of Nate Davis is going to help?
I was actually surprised to see them give Nate Davis the contract they did. I mean, he's been one of the worst interior linemen in the NFL since he entered the league. And last year he was serviceable, so maybe the Bears only watched tape on him last season. But I wouldn't expect him to give production above zero point 0.3 points better than replacement level.
Well, the team also drafted Darnell Wright very high in this draft, I think 10th overall. So can he be a day one starter that makes an impact?
Well, tackles in this range we can see go in either direction. So we see tackles come in and succeed right away as rookies, like like Rashawn Slater did, but we've also seen them struggle. I mean, we saw the Giants drafted Evan Neal 7th overall last year, and he ranked second worst in pass blocking efficiency on true pass sets out of 56 qualifiers last year. So Darnell Wright, your guess is as good as mine on this one, but I would expect him to be just slightly above replacement level.
Yeah. Well, Braxton Jones also has a year under his belt, so kind of expect some strides to be made there.
Well, yeah, Jones showed improvement game after game last year. He was not good out of the gates as you would expect from a 5th round rookie starter. And we've talked about this year 1 to year 2 leap that players make. So I do think that Jones is going to be a give the Bears better left tackle production than they got last year. But Jones has a ceiling on what he can give you because of his 5th round pedigree. I mean, we just don't see tackles, particularly left tackles, drafted in the 5th round that end up being Pro Bowl players. It's typically those guys that are drafted near the top of the draft that you can expect. So Jones, I think his ceiling is a slightly above average tackle, and he's probably more like league average or slightly below average coming into the 2023 season.
Well, where we saw them make some big transactions was on defense. So what are your thoughts on the additions of linebackers Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards?
Well, yeah, they definitely splurged on linebacker. They are dedicating $20 million in cap space to those two guys. And, that's really zagging against what the rest of the league has kind of found out in the modern NFL is you don't need to really spend on linebacker. So that said, we have seen Eberflus have success with the defense that has, kind of devoted towards opportunistic linebackers. When Eberflus was in Indianapolis, remember that Shaquille Leonard had 2 All-Pro seasons at linebacker, so we can't rule out that these guys are going to make a difference. But if I was building a defense, I certainly wouldn't be devoting that percentage of my cap to linebacker.
Yeah, well, they also spent day 2 capital on Javon Dexter and Zach Pickens to improve this D line. Are these going to be pretty relevant for them or no?
Well, you say improve, but these guys maybe could improve the D line in year 2 or year 3 of their careers, but we do not see day 2 draft picks make a major difference in the pass rush. Hardly at all. There may be 1 or 2 guys pop in the entire NFL from that range each season. And so we can't just expect both of those guys to be on the Bears. And honestly, the Bears needed help. I mean, they had a league low 24% pressure rate last year. I don't think they made any moves this offseason to improve that. I expect this defensive line to be one of the worst in the NFL again in 2023.
Yeah. Well, we look at their secondary. So you have Eddie Jackson playing alongside Jaquan Brisker as well. So is Brisker going to be able to build off that solid 2022?
Yeah, I liked what the Bears did with Brisker last year. They kind of moved him around. They played him in the box. They played him in the slot. They played him as a deep safety. Eddie Jackson obviously has had a solid NFL career to this point, but mostly in the secondary, I'm worried about these cornerbacks outside of Jalen Johnson. I mean, it is not looking good. They might be starting second round rookie Tyreek Stevenson. I mean, you can see that on the Ourlads page right now. That might be their best option, which certainly could go terribly. And then they're rolling Kyler Gordon out there at nickelback again. And Gordon surrendered nearly 2 yards per slot cover snap in 2022, which ranked 65th out of 68 qualifiers. So at cornerback, it's looking pretty bleak for the Bears.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we see this Bears win total, and it implies that there's going to be some pretty major improvement from 3-14 now it's 7.5. Are you buying into this?
It's going to come down to whether Fields can give the Bears, that Pro Bowl caliber production. Basically, Fields has to be better than Kirk Cousins coming into this season for the Bears to reach that, roughly 500 plateau, because you just look at this team in the trenches. I think they're pretty much the worst in the NFL. I mean, we talked about how we're kind of feeling it's sketchy offensive line. The defensive line is awful on paper. We talked about how we're worried about this cornerback group. So it's basically Justin Fields and how much can we see his passing improve now that he has DJ Moore on the field, and he's going to have to be a Pro Bowl level player for this Bears team to go over this win total.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be a really fun division to watch this year. It's going to be competitive kind of all the way through. So I think that will do it for episode 4 of the Dr. Bob Sports Pod. So as always, thank you for listening. And if you haven't, leave a like and feel free to subscribe. We love it. So thank you.
All right. We'll see you guys next Wednesday.